Welcome to Bots and Beyond, your weekly dose of all things automation, mixing up end user, vendor, and consultant experience to create your go-to podcast for bot-related insights. I am your host, Wayne Butterfield. Welcome back to Bots and Beyond, everybody. Great to have you with us. Another amazing episode this week. It's a really interesting conversation this week. Somebody who I was introduced to recently, Scott Lichtenstein, CEO and co-founder at BuyerSight. And we had an interesting conversation. I thought, this is going to make a fantastic episode of Bots and Beyond. So welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Wayne. Great to be here.
Great. And I want the audience to kind of gain a bit of insight into the problem you're trying to solve, the way you're trying to solve it. And obviously, I'm sure, the problems that you're assisting with will really resonate with the audience. I'm not giving much away at the moment because I'd really like you to kind of do the usual intro, which is who you are, what you do, and why you do it, and then let's really get into the nuts and bolts of Buyer Insight.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. So I'm Scott. I'm the co-founder of BuyerSight, and we're an early stage company that uses AI to help sales managers become better coaches and leaders. So I've spent over 15 years in startups, all on the go-to-market side. I started in business development and went on to lead teams in sales, marketing, and sales operations at various high-growth startups. And it was in these experiences that I noticed some changes that were happening to the world of sales. There's a big trend right now towards increasing automation for sales reps. And what that means is that they're layering on tools that help them send hundreds of emails a day, place dozens, if not hundreds of dials a day, automatically enter all their data into a CRM or into other tools. And with all this automation for these customer-facing reps, I was noticing that the role of the manager was starting to change pretty dramatically over the last few years. That with more and more automation means more and more data, and that managers were spending more and more time in spreadsheets and spot checking and trying to be basically amateur data analysts to understand what their team was doing and how it was impacting their customers. And that meant that they were spending less and less time in the field, listening in on calls, coaching their reps, and getting into the nitty-gritty of their deals. And we thought that this change was not a positive one, that managers should be leaning into their skills that they've spent time building up and cultivating, skills like empathetic leadership, like coaching, and really communication with their prospects, and that they should be spending less time, again, trying to be these amateur data analysts. And it was from this problem, this trend, which is where we started BuyerSight. We realized that AI and machine learning could help managers to find the issues that their team was having, that they wouldn't need to be manually looking through this data. Computers could analyze this data and guide them to where their issues are in their team. So again, that they could lean into those more human-to-human skills that they've spent time cultivating.
So talk to me a bit more about the kind of the problem then. So the way that I see is almost the sales rep has been given too much technology. So they've got too much, and maybe what they're doing is they're concentrating on process and not necessarily on sales, or what are the problems you're actually solving with BuyerSight?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let's dive in specifically, because there is the issue, first of all, with the rep and how does the individual rep handle all this automation that's being layered on top of them. And there is a rich ecosystem of tools trying to tackle this problem. Specifically, what we noticed, though, early on was that the manager was being overlooked. That if you have a lot of technology geared towards the rep, or even in a lot of cases geared towards sales leadership or sales operations function, there's a middle that's being left out here, the frontline managers who have to deal with these heavily automated reps. They're responsible for the production of these heavily automated reps, but these automation tools aren't designed for the managers. They're designed with the rep in mind, with that person who's actually doing the selling. And so this change started meaning that managers were spending more and more time trying to figure out what their teams were doing. So when I was leading a team back in the day, that meant me spending a lot of time inside the CRM, manually spot checking communication. I'm looking for examples where my team made a mistake or for opportunities for me to coach. A great example of this, it was really one of the inspirations behind BuyerSight, was actually one of the junior reps that I hired and was then trying to coach so that he wouldn't get fired. He was struggling pretty mightily in this job. But I saw some raw ability in him, some raw talent, but he just wasn't clicking. As a point of reference, some of the other reps on the team were hitting 15 qualified prospects a month. He was struggling to get 3. And so I was spending so much time manually checking, what is this guy doing wrong? Why is he struggling? And they weren't obvious problems. They weren't obvious issues where you could just listen in on a call or two and figure out what was happening. It was complex, and a lot of it went to the root of him being heavily automated. He was making mistakes at scale. And so to really understand this as a manager was nearly impossible unless I had my own tools or some sort of technology backing me up to parse through everything he was doing and alerting me to where is he making these mistakes. Or even at a very basic level, just categorizing what he's doing so that I could then investigate myself. And so that was really where we started with this problem of the manager and their underperforming rep and trying to help them to understand what's going on here. And from there, we realized that this problem is actually much bigger than just underperforming reps, but it's endemic to the entire industry, that role of the manager is changing with automation and more data, but the manager's skill set and tools aren't commensurately changing along with it, that they're sort of stuck 5 to 10 years ago when their teams are advancing very rapidly.
Great. And one of the things I know I asked you before, I said, isn't this what Salesforce is supposed to do?
Yeah, that's a great question about, what is a customer relationship management software? What is a CRM supposed to do? And, a lot of people would suspect that is the case, that you would be receiving insights from your CRM. But in the industry today, or the sales function across industries, the CRM has really become a system of record, more like a data repository than a tool one gathers insights from. It's a place to store and categorize information. And so that's sort of one of the core issues that we're tackling here, is that once you've stored this information, making sense of it, taking it to that next step is quite difficult even today. And so I think, historically also that tools like Salesforce or other CRMs haven't really invested into this area because it's a difficult problem. It's a difficult computer science challenge. A lot of the advances in natural language processing and AI are making this more approachable today, but it's still not an easy challenge. And it's something that is quite a bit different from the core skill set. If you think about an enterprise CRM company, about building the software that they've developed, it's quite a bit different than getting into this true artificial intelligence that we're talking about. So I think that they will eventually be doing something like this, but today there's a hole where these managers are being left behind and the CRMs aren't doing this.
Interesting. And I know when we spoke before, and this is what really piqued my interest and why I thought it would be such a great episode is, and actually I want to go back to your earlier example. So what you said was, that there was a junior sales guy, and what you realized was that he was really automated. Now, I'm guessing, that was a lot of work on your part. And you eventually uncovered something. Now, was that through data, or was that just having to be through, ongoing monitoring of what he was doing? But so first of all, I'm keen to understand, how did you uncover what was wrong? Mm-hmm. Were you able to put steps in place? And I guess that was probably one of the early kind of brainwaves. You were like, why haven't we got an automation to be able to automate the uncovering of, I guess, sales professional techniques, good and bad. So loads of stuff there kind of floating around in my mind. But tell us about, how you came to understand the example you gave earlier on, and then talk to us about how BuyerSight kind of automates that process.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case, and we'll get a little bit technical for a second, but hopefully that's okay for your listeners. Just that the rep that I was specifically mentioning, he was having some issues that were not surface level easy to understand. And so an example would be missing responses from prospects. So he's so heavily automated, sending out hundreds of emails a day, that when somebody responds to him, his inbox was so full, he was sometimes missing these responses. And sometimes these people were actually very hot prospects, essentially saying like, I want to buy now, and then he's not responding to them. And if you think about the way that a sales funnel works, that's like a critical mistake that is going to lead to very impacted results at the bottom of the funnel. So, this is just one example of the types of mistakes he was making. But that's something that's incredibly hard to uncover as a manager by the way that CRMs are organized. You're going to get a repository of all of his communications with no indication which ones are even inbound or outbound for the most part. Sometimes you'll get basic information about that, but no tags about content or topics or where we are in the sales process. So if you take this rep and in a given week, he might have 4,000 to 5,000 communications that he's had, and I'm looking for the needle in the haystack of where did he drop the ball. And so again, there's many other examples of types of balls that he dropped, and they're very hard to uncover manually when you're searching through these thousands of activity records. So to your point, how did I solve this without BuyerSight? Well, I had a bit of a data background, so I got kind of clever. But a lot of it was exporting to Excel and then using Excel's search functionality and some Excel formulas and macros to find those issues. But that was still very tedious, still very manual, even though I had this data analysis background. And so this was where, one of these late nights where I was like, why am I writing these horrible formulas in Excel to try to find these situations where this guy screwed up when I'm, talking to one of my old friends who's an engineer and now my co-founder about this, when other applications are able to categorize communications or to get very deep into what's being said or where we are in a sales process. So there was a disconnect between what I was doing as a sales manager and what I was seeing being applied in other industries. And so that's really where we started.
Brilliant. I know there's been some real success stories, and having, as somebody who, I'm not a business development executive by any stretch, but I kind of am involved in a lot of sales process, and I work with a lot of people who are in business development. I was really impressed in some of the kind of insights that you were able to provide in some of your kind of early adopters. I mean, can you kind of give us a bit of insight into what you are seeing and just some real kind of data points around the outputs that you're getting and what value your clients are seeing from your tool?
Yeah, that's a great. And so to also tying back to the second part of your previous question about how do we solve that issue with that, how does BuyerSight help solve the issue with the rep that I was facing a couple of years ago? And what we do is we categorize everything that a salesperson does. So we call it the digital exhaust. So everything that they do online is part of a sales process. We're collecting and categorizing using machine learning. So at a basic level, we're saying, is this a back and forth about scheduling? Is this a pricing negotiation? Where are we in the funnel and what's happening? So we're using machine learning to make those categorizations. And then from those categorizations, we're looking for variations in behavior across the team. So we're looking for who's dropping the ball and what do they need coaching with. But on the other side, we're also looking into the behaviors of the top performing reps. What are they doing to close more deals? And is this something that we could learn and spread to the rest of the team? And so from those abnormalities, as we like to call it, or issues that we find in the data, we make recommendations to the manager about where to spend their time. And again, the goal is that we're taking the manager out of this horrible spot checking that I used to have to do, or these hours spent with their noses buried in spreadsheets, and freeing them up to be back in the field or to be doing ride-alongs, to be coaching their reps and really getting into, leaning into those skills that they've been training to have as a manager, like empathetic leadership, coaching, just being there and being a lot of sales managers like to talk about being the therapist for their team because sales is such a psychological profession. And those types of skills are what we think sales managers should be doing. And that this type of data analysis is perfect for the machines to be doing. And so some examples of where we've helped some teams, some of the more interesting ones too, is it's a very common problem for some sales teams to single thread their deals, which means that they're only talking to one contact on the other side. And there's a lot of research showing that if you bring in other contacts or other stakeholders into those conversations, you are more likely to close that deal. a lot of reasons why, and there's a lot of great research showing that this is true. But what we found for one team in particular was that they had a big issue with single threading on their team. But not only was it an issue across the entire team, but it was actually an issue that directly lined up with performance, meaning that their top performing reps were bringing in the most contacts into their deals. They had the least amount of single threading, and their worst performing reps had this problem the most frequently. And so again, not only was the entire team very high, but there was a distribution on the team that mirrored performance. And the management was not aware of this, but by flagging this for them, they were able to make the change to start bringing in new contacts earlier. But then when we realized this was an area of impact for them, we took it a step further and started to look at not only, are more people being brought in, but who is being brought in and when. So looking at the deals when they win and identifying how are their winning reps multi-threading or bringing in those extra contacts into those deals. And so this is actually a really cool outcome that is likely to be a case study for us, where this team was able to increase their conversion rates by bringing in more contacts. They're actually seeing more sales because of this. And again, this was all because we were able to flag that they had a single threaded issue. And, looking at the other side of the funnel, so looking at then prospecting or trying to outreach and get people's attention, our AI looks into the construction and quality of outbound prospecting emails. And there's a lot of great research about what gets the highest response rates. And you want to have your email short, clear, and direct. If you're writing the great American novel to your prospects, they are not going to respond. You want something that's easy to respond to on a smartphone. And so a lot of the times we're able to flag for prospectors, reps who are focused on this outbound communication and their emails are suffering and it's impacting their response rates. And so we find this for a lot of teams, and especially for new reps that are joining or come out of an academic context, their writing is too long and too convoluted. And this is something where managers often have an intuition about it, but they don't have a number to measure this, and they don't have a metric to track over time. So by putting a number on this, and we have a readability score that comes out of academia that measures how hard is something to read, and by having that metric over time, managers can get, again, something to coach to and can make a big impact on their prospecting teams. And so we're looking at all kinds of sales performance metrics, ranging from the movement of deals and how salespeople interact with their deals to their specific communication records and how are they trying to talk to their prospects. And again, the goal is that we would find abnormalities or variations so that the managers can then use their coaching and their leadership skills to solve those problems.
Brilliant. And I think there's so much kind of so many points there that I could kind of dive into. Thinking about, we often look at a sales professional and measure their performance based on the amount of business that they've been able to generate, which of course is, going to be a key KPI. I don't think we necessarily really understand, or I at least have really struggled to understand kind of what makes a great sales professional versus one that's not necessarily performing, and kind of being able to provide metrics and data points and patterns, similarities, differences, feels like a bit of a game changer to me, which was why, I thought it would be, an amazing opportunity to hear kind of firsthand some of the progress that you guys are making and some of the results that your clients are seeing. Quick couple more questions. The first one is, do you use this on yourselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's kind of fun and kind of meta in a lot of ways, but we're a small team, so a lot of the variations that we're looking for is across team members. But even when just a tiny startup like ourselves, it's very interesting. And one of the cool things, and the word that for me, using it on myself, that keeps jumping to mind is accountability. It really helps me hold myself accountable. I can see when I'm making mistakes or when I'm not putting in the effort. It's just so clearly visible in a way that you don't get out of traditional sales tools.
And on that, so are there any best practices that you are now starting to see in the tool, and you're like, actually, ignore what, one kind of influencer says on LinkedIn, where he says, these are the 5 things you must do. That's based on his own experience and the way that he maybe approaches sales. We've analyzed 6,000 salespeople, and actually these are the things that they do differently. You almost can provide a data view on what makes a great sales process, perhaps not even person, right, but the process that is best or delivers the best results. I think there's a really interesting kind of view, and whether that's now or whether that's, as the platform grows, and then you can actually see over time how that view or those data points change. Because think about COVID, right? I mean, if your best way of selling was historically sat over the desk from somebody and looking them in the eyes and shaking their hand, and that's how you built trust, and that's why they bought from you. In a post-COVID world, that's a real struggle, right? I haven't had a face-to-face meeting since February last year.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly this data approach, I'd be really interested. And it's probably not, we haven't got time for it today, but I feel like this technology and the data that you're collecting is going to give us something that we just don't necessarily have available, or have even had an opportunity to understand before. So I'm really excited about about the role that you can play from a sales perspective, and I can't wait to for my business development community themselves to kind of engage with this episode, Scott, and also with you guys moving forward, because I think there's something really special here that I feel is unique, certainly from my own past experiences. So that was kind of my summary, which hopefully is encouraging for you. Last question, I guess, is where's next? Do you have a view where you're going to maneuver forward to? What are the problems you haven't quite solved yet? Where you think there's still a bit of a gap? Do you kind of have a vision of where you expect to be in the next kind of 12, 24 months?
Yeah, and thank you, Wayne, for those words as well. And we do have a plan for where we're going. And you're exactly right that there's a lot of interesting data coming out about sales process and what is actually impacting deals positively or negatively. And I think it does fly in the face of some assumptions that people have made historically. So, definitely stay tuned for more of that coming out soon. We'll be releasing some cool information or cool data about what actually drives sales processes forward. But in terms of what's coming next for us, really, we're trying to understand salesperson behavior at ever more levels of granularity. So what is actually impacting their deals? And as I was touching on earlier, and this is a really cool machine learning problem where we're starting to compare patterns of behavior across a sales process against outcomes. And so then we can get really deep understanding of variations across team members and across teams. And so I think that there'll be a lot more impactful recommendations that we can make for sales teams as we understand salesperson behavior ever at an increasing level of granularity. But one thing that's also we haven't touched on, but is super interesting, is that we started with the software sales and technology sales industry. That's where I came from. That was our background. And that's where we knew the most people, frankly, right, to start off as an early stage startup. But now we've got some success there, we're starting to branch out into other industries as well. And so, we're talking to manufacturing companies, more traditional businesses, services businesses, and then not only across additional industries, but also functions. Because if you think about it, this is not a problem specific to sales. Any customer-facing function where the employee is representing the company and interacting with customers or potential customers, the manager of that person is going to be facing similar challenges as more and more automation and more technology is layered onto that that customer-facing rep role. And so we do plan to expand to other functions as well, where anyone that's speaking on behalf of the company to a customer, their manager could benefit from a tool like BuyerSight. So we'll be expanding not only in terms of understanding salesperson behavior at a deeper level, but also more industries and more functions.
Well, I think that really helps kind of set the scene for the future as well. Obviously, for anyone interested, Scott will be linked on the post when we go live with the episode. I'm sure we'll be happy to answer any questions. And with that, thank you ever so much for joining. I think I really enjoyed this episode. And as you can tell from my enthusiasm, I always like finding new things and new ways of using technology that are useful for the enterprise and fixing problems that many people have struggled with. So thank you for sharing that, Scott, and thank you for being on Bots and Beyond this week.
Thank you for having me, Wayne.
Excellent. And with that, guys, thank you very much for joining, and we will speak to you next week.